Hey, this is Ali Sue. Welcome to Pharmacy Entrepreneur TV. If you are a past, present, and future pharmacist, and you want to create a business and life you love, this is the show for you. Today, I'm very excited to introduce pharmacist Carlene McMaugh to you all. Carlene has worked in the healthcare field for over 20 years in varied roles across 2 continents, and has worked as a pharmacist for over 10 years in Australia and 3 years in the UK. Carlene currently works in the pharmaceutical industry in the field of heart failure and is a member of the Deakin University Human Research Ethics Committee, as well as being a host for a podcast for the Australian Journal of Pharmacy. Carlene writes clinical, practice, and opinion pieces for both the Australian Pharmacist and the Australian Journal of Pharmacy. In addition, Carlene is a global lead, gender equity for the International Pharmaceutical Federation. Let's welcome Carlene. Hi, Carlene. How are you today?
Good, thank you, Ali. How are you?
Good, thank you. We're so excited to have you here to share with us your experience, your 20 years experience in pharmacy in both in Australia and UK. And so tell us, how did you start your pharmacy journey?
The pharmacy journey, think about how far back to take you. But I originally started off by studying a Bachelor of Science, and I did a double major in genetics and microbiology. I loved the course, but I realized that there'd be a lot of, obviously, time inside a laboratory doing research, and I thought that I'd probably prefer to do something when I was in contact with patients. So when I went to study pharmacy, it was actually when I was working in the pharmacy on the weekends as a healthcare assistant that the pharmacist there suggested that I thought about pharmacy, and I thought it was a great idea. Thought about moving back to the UK and saw it as an opportunity to move back to the UK and study while I was there. And then when I finished studying pharmacy, I thought about what was the best way to gain a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge in a short period of time. So I actually really wanted to locum, and I did do that for 6 months. I enjoyed the variety of experiences, the variety of people to work with, the variety of people to learn from. And obviously one of those locuming experiences became a permanent role, which is what happens for the majority of people. And then you move into pharmacy management, and before you know it, your career set in stone, and you're working as a pharmacy manager, growing a business. I did actually start off in a pharmacy, working as a second pharmacist in a pharmacy that didn't actually have a license to dispense at first. So we would actually just do over-the-counter medication. We're applying for a license to get a dispensary. So I actually got the opportunity to start off a pharmacy from scratch. I don't know many people that have had that as an opportunity. And that was actually quite sad to say goodbye to, because it's really interesting when you get to start in the pharmacy, starting how you want to run it, training the staff, having everything the way that you want it to be running, legally, ethically, professionally, from the start. But it was a great opportunity to move back here and then obviously retake my oral exam and my pre-reg exam and my supervised training. I had to redo all of that when I moved back over here. So I've been working as a pharmacist for 3 years in the UK and management for 2 of those, and then moved back here, had to start from scratch to rebuild your career again, which was a very interesting step. And whilst I did that, I moved into the pharmaceutical industry. It created an opportunity for me to still work, because obviously the process, they only did the pre-reg exam 4 times a year. You had to do the supervised hours, which was 152 at the time as well. And then you had to do the oral exam. So it was all timed, and realistically with the job, it took a year to pull it all together. And then I got to start off my career in Australia. And with that, I've mostly just been locuming or working as a part-time pharmacist while managing my other commitments.
I think a lot of pharmacists are really interested in pharmacy industry, but have no clue what you actually do. We know that, rep come into pharmacy. That's as far as we know. Tell us more, which area you're in and how did you get into it?
So I was actually quite inspired when I was in the UK, and I actually had a representative come in that was working with, I guess, Nurofen, so working with some of those products. And my staff members, I asked them who was the best representative that popped in to the pharmacy to see us, and they recommended him. So I went and had a chat with him, and I was like, look, I'm interested in moving into the pharmaceutical industry. Um, could you give me some advice? What was your, like, am I able to shadow you? And actually I did. I shadowed him one
Mm.
day a week for maybe 3 months before I moved across, because I knew that prior to moving into any industry, you want to make sure that you can say, because always going to ask you, do you know what the day involves? And what did you like about it? And what did you not like about it? And from having experience in it, it really made a difference. So I shadowed him for about 3 months in the UK whilst I was preparing to move over here. When I moved over here, um, I it did take a little while to break into the industry. You kept getting asked the same questions,
Mm.
like, how do we know that you can sell? You're
Mm.
moving from a pharmacy management position into a pharmaceutical sales position. It's very different. Well, I guess I would say it's a different skill set, but also it's a totally different step in your career.
Mm.
I remember having an interview with a company who did actually hire me, and I remember asking them at the end of the interview, and I was like, do you have any reservations about hiring me? And he said that he worried that I would get bored, and that I
Mm.
wouldn't stay at it for very long because of that. And I was like, okay, well, that was fair. I don't actually remember what happened after that. I remember just some adrenaline running, and I was just talking. That was actually my first start in the pharmaceutical industry. I remember being one of the first pharmacists in that company. I remember that we went to conference and they're like, there's one other pharmacist in Sydney. By the time I left, they had about 7 pharmacists in Melbourne. And I was like, brilliant. So it was obviously a really good experience. And
Mm.
it showcased the fact that I guess they always worry that you've got clinical knowledge and then, you've got sales knowledge. So some people are high in their clinical knowledge, but not in their sales. And some people are high in their sales knowledge, but not their clinical. So how do they bring them both together?
Mm.
And I think that as pharmacists, we underestimate how much we actually do talk to people, how good our
Mm.
relationships are, how
Mm.
much we have to convince people of things. And I think if we transferred those examples to the role, then we do actually have more transferable skills. So the pharmaceutical industry, what does it look like? There are actually so many roles. I think that you can actually end up working in a bit of a silo, because
Mm.
I spend a lot of time on the road, which means I don't really spend a lot of time in head office. A lot of head offices are in Sydney, so there's a little bit of a disconnect there. I spend my time on the road working with GPs. I feel very comfortable with GPs. My first job was as a medical receptionist, and I did that until I was 21, so for about 7 or 8 years. So I've always been really comfortable in that environment. I work in heart failure, which is a very interesting
Mm.
condition. It's unique. It's I wouldn't even say, it's quite funny. Whenever people think about sales representatives, they always think about selling and pushing something. I see it a bit like education
Mm.
and discussion. Like, this is why someone does something. If you understand the why, then sometimes you can understand how to change things. I don't think any one medication is a solution to all problems, but I think that you can take a holistic approach and discuss all of the different variable options, and hopefully make sure that at the end of the discussion that, I don't know, that the patient's getting the best treatment. Because you never know what you'll find out. You might find out that a medication's being used really well, and the doctor will be able to give you all of these great examples. You might find out that a patient's medication could be optimized. You might find out that something might be being used as how you expected it to. Like, it's a conversation, and there's a lot about guidelines, and there's a lot about clinical trials, and there's so much that goes on in a space. So I may be focused in heart failure, but there's so many clinical trials that come out constantly for different medications, and it's constant learning, and I think we forget that as well. So I think that's what I do in my role. So we do call it a sales role, but I do see it as quite different, and I learned so much from my doctors as well. Like,
Mm.
even talking about what it was like in heart failure management in the beginning, and when they couldn't use ACEs and they were only used in hospitals, and they just talk about the whole history and how the experience has gone, and I find that I just learned so much from them too. In pharmaceutical industry, there are other roles. So you've got medical affairs, where you
Mm.
might be looking at, they always describe them as key opinion leaders, so people who are quite influential, maybe coming up with strategies, medical roles. And then you've also got your information technology section, you've got your research section, and your
Mm.
quality assurance. You've also got all of your management level. You've got your product managers, so all of your marketing as well. So I find that when you actually get the jobs, like, I think every week they do a email out to the internal associates with all the jobs that are available. And I think that even now we're still like, oh, wow, that's a job and that's a new job. And is that something that you're interested in? But I'd always say that for any job that you are interested in, just like what we did in the beginning, always make sure that you know as much about it as possible and have as many examples of transferable skills. And I know that we always use that term so flippantly, like transferable skills. And everyone's like, well, I use those all the time. Like I manage my time, I converse with people, but there still has to be a little bit more in the aspect of clinical knowledge is great. And it's a great component of what you do, but it's not all that you do. You're multitask, and the multitasking in pharmacy is phenomenal when you see what somebody gets done in a day. By the time you get home, you're like completely exhausted. When you think about the conversations you have with patients and they come in and they really have just used Google to diagnose themselves and they know exactly what's wrong and exactly what product that they need. And that's not always the case. And you spend so much time with your patients talking to them about their problem, why what they think will help won't help, and convincing them about what will help based on evidence and clinical data. That's your transferable skills. It's not always just this one thing. But multitasking, really good communication and relationship skills, your communication relationship with doctors already when you speak to them about changing the prescriptions. These are all transferable skills and all really concrete examples.
That you also are a AJP podcast host. So tell us, how did you get into that role?
So with that one is a little bit different. So that one we're quite structured. So we take the opportunity to interview different pharmacists, and we'll have a series of questions. So credit to people for donating their time and their patience. And we try to make it as up to date as possible because it's more political in nature, and there's so much that happens in a short period of time. But obviously coronavirus has made it a lot harder to have any face-to-face meetings, so that's put a bit of a dampener, because obviously we want to make sure that the audio quality is good, and that we can continue to provide the same quality of podcast as we have. So basically it came about that hubby and I would spend a lot of time talking about pharmacy and the politics and what's going on, and actually it's back and forth. So I would find out something and have a discussion. We try to look at what's going on in the world, and we try to, bounce ideas of each other. And then we're like, well, actually, when you catch up with people, we have personal discussions and we also have professional and political discussions. But I don't think that everyone's always got the opportunity to hear these discussions. So it was just about saying, well, we're having them. Why don't we bring them out to people so they can hear the pros and cons of different topics? It's not about who's right or wrong. It's just about hearing different sides and why people believe what they believe. Because obviously, if you can get lots of information behind you and make informed choices, then we can always take all of this advice and make the best choice that we can coming forward. So whether it be 60-day supply, whether it be medicinal cannabis, whether it be pharmacist remuneration, it's just hearing both sides, where the history is, how we've ended up where we have, what we're looking to do, what can be done, and sharing some of the challenges that people face. And I think it just puts a voice to it, because sometimes I think that we do end up working a lot by ourselves, or we end up a lot in dynamics where you're the pharmacist and you're training staff, or constantly involved in the sale and listening to what's going on. But for you, you have your ideas as well, and you want to know about what's going on in the profession. So this gives voices to pharmacists for them to hear what other people are thinking and hopefully hear their own voice in there too.
Yeah, definitely. We want to hear from pharmacists and for general public to understand what pharmacists actually do and what's happening in the pharmacy world as well.
Correct. I think we underestimate so much about the public knowledge, even about pharmacist wages, because every time I've had the odd discussion with a doctor or a receptionist, they're amazed at pharmacist wages because they just don't know. The public and other people in other sectors are really good advocates and support for us in our fight as well. It's not just about us always having to advocate for ourselves. There are lots of people who just don't know. So by making it available on Apple and Spotify and for people to be able to gain access, it's just giving people information so that they can put it together, so they can adjust their expectations, so that they know what we are actually doing, and we're doing a really good job, and we face really significant challenges as a profession. So it's just giving us a voice.
Speaking of voice, you're also an advocate for gender equality. And you're a
Yes.
global leader for FIP. So tell us about, so first of all, FIP is the International Pharmaceutical Federation. So how did you get into this role and what is your role about?
Yeah, so I'm privileged to be with two other people. So I'm representing Australia. We've also got Vibhuti Iyer from New York in America, and we've got Nadia Bakari from the UK. And the three of us together are global leads for gender equity and diversity. So getting involved in that, I think prior to that, I've released a few podcasts on diversity and equity. It's something that I'm quite passionate about. I think it's because it's something that you face on a daily basis. I think we're quite aware that gender and pay isn't equal. We're very aware that there are certain things such as maternity, sexual harassment that might be slanted towards one gender more than the other. These are all things that affect all people, but they can affect certain groups of people in a higher incidence. So it's about finding ways to motivate people to be prepared to have discussions. It's about motivating people to even have processes, guidelines in place to make sure that we make the most of these opportunities. The one thing you don't want to do is be making someone who's being brave enough to have a discussion about how they're being disadvantaged to then make them feel like a further victim. So it's about making sure that people know what their rights are, but also that employers feel that they know how to feel confident to have that discussion should it happen and where to go and what to do next. And that's the thing as well, because it's making sure that all these processes are in place. But also it's about having the discussion. It's a discussion once again. So it's just bringing all these discussions to light. It might be a one-on-one discussion that you have with someone, or you might finally have the courage to speak to one person or even the PSS or something, but it's about making sure that everyone is having this discussion and people can actually say, actually, that's not okay. And also about early stages. Sometimes things happen and it's an earlier stage and you're like, well, does this mean what I think it means? Maybe if I ignore it, should I do something about it? It's making sure that we're having the discussion so that you can make the best choice at the time about how you want to proceed and how you want to handle situations so that it doesn't lead to further stress, more isolation, more discrimination, or people being forced out of jobs. That's what you don't want. You want people to feel like they can have discussion, that people are reprimanded and held accountable for their actions, and that you feel safe to have discussions with your employers and that you feel safe going to work. So it's not always as extreme as that. Sometimes it is just about, well, not just about, but sometimes it is even about pay. Sometimes it's about pay and feeling confident to have that discussion with your employer about the fact that there is a wage difference. I find that people are sometimes aware of it, but how do you have that discussion? And not just how do you have that discussion, but how do you make sure it's a reputable discussion? Like I had a discussion with my friend and they told me they earn a couple of grand more. Is that enough? Or do you go to a recruiter and say, this is what I'm getting paid. This is how long I've been with the company. Is this equivalent? And it's about having all of these. And also Google's great to research the average wages of your company. I've done that. And when you put all three of these things together, you actually give yourself a really good case to have a discussion about your wages and if they're commensurate with the other, with your other colleagues. And then you have a choice to make based on the answer or that discussion that you have with your employer. But I would say great. And also with maternity, I've had some discussions with other females. Obviously, once you go through maternity yourself, it prompts you to have that discussion with other people. And I've actually found that people are happy to have a bit of a discussion about maternity, but they want to kind of keep it quiet. They don't want to use their name. They want to remain anonymous. And I'm quite surprised because it's a thing that everyone's worried about will impact on their career and their future opportunities, even if they have been discriminated against.
So now, not only you're doing all those three jobs, you also have one more. You're a member of Deakin University Human Research Ethics Committee.
Yes.
Tell us about
Now I'll tell you about that one. So that one is a little bit different. So still in the space of clinical evidence. So that would be where, I guess, a clinical trial application has been put through and it's considered to be more than low risk. And then there is a committee that actually reviews that. So you might have 2 or 3 people per clinical paper. It just depends, like we meet 5 times a year and it will depend on how many applications there are. So basically we review it, pose questions for either the researcher or to discuss as the committee, and just make sure that they're done in the best way, or they get to move forward in the best way to maintain the ethics and protect researchers, the public, just for the best interests of everybody. So it's been an experience. I've been doing that now for just over a year. It's nice to be part of a committee where you're reviewing things at such an early stage. It's great to be with a great group of academics where you get to share ideas. I feel that I still learn, because obviously each clinical paper application is different. Each discussion is different. And there's so many different angles, and by having so many people review it, you get to see all the different aspects for consideration. And it's a lot of, it's a commitment, but it's also very interesting. So I've enjoyed that for over a year as well. I kind of see everything as going into each other. So basically, by the time you're doing the Human Research Ethics Committee, you're looking at applications for clinical trials. And then if I'm working in pharma, I'm then looking at clinical trials to present data, and that gives evidence for guidelines to present data to doctors to have a discussion about the best management of patients. Or then I might be doing the podcast where you get to discuss the application of the people who are in charge of supplying medications to patients and what the politics are that govern that profession. But I would say that all of these roles, to me, are still very much so embedded in my strengths, which is I've always worked in healthcare. Advocacy is important. I like to share opinions, gather opinions, make informed choices, and help other people make informed choices, and just share voices. So I think that they all kind of work together, and they're all using slightly different skill sets, but all towards a very similar goal.
Wonderful. Now, how do you juggle all of these jobs, as well as being a mom, having a baby, as well as have a life of your own?
These are very, very good questions, and I admit that it's a weekly review. So I'll start my weekend with this great plan for the week of how I'm going to get everything done and my priorities and the actions. And then by the end of the week, I get to review it again and say, did all of my actions reflect all of my priorities? Because sometimes it is a juggling act. I hope that at each stage, not everything will require all of your time and energy. So I hope at one stage it might be the podcast, and then at another stage it might be Deakin, but also having some things in your life that kind of coast along. So things that you're very comfortable with, that you've been doing for a while, where you're not learning as much, and then other aspects of your life where you are learning, where you're building skills and where you're trying to develop, and seeing as a constant ebb and flow. So nothing is constant, nothing is boring, but not everything has to always be a challenge, and not everything has to be something that you're just really comfortable with and is just ticking along. For me, I'm all about learning, developing, getting engaged. Maybe some people would say I could get bored easily. That's quite true. So for me, I need to have my fingers in lots of different things, and I find that it energizes me. Even from a young age with my CV, I was always considering the fact that I wanted to have a breadth of experience, all in the same area. But I would be at uni and I'd be working 2 jobs as a medical receptionist. I'd be working as a healthcare assistant at 2 pharmacies, and I'd be working in a laboratory, and I'd be doing all of these different roles to just create a breadth of experience, so that each day it would just look a little bit different, and I can learn something else and contribute in a different way. And I'm still looking at that now, just in different aspects, without also understanding that I still have like a full-time job. And also, if something doesn't work, it doesn't work. And also, if you find that it's exhausting you and you're not energized by it, then it's not the one for you to be contributing to. Because I find that I do enjoy those things. I find that I enjoy doing presentations for equity, or coming up with statements, or working on that. I find that I do enjoy when we have the discussions for Deakin, and you're listening to everyone's different perspectives on how they think this application can move forward in a better way. I find that when I do the podcast and I'm sitting there with people, I'm completely motivated by their energy, by their passion, by their stories, and I just love it. And then when I'm listening back to it afterwards, I find that it has the exact same effect. And I can only imagine that when people are listening to the podcast, they're feeling the same thing, that they're feeling like, wow, this is something that's a possibility for me because somebody else has done it. This is something that I can do. This is something that I haven't even thought about. How did they do it? And it just motivates people to ask more questions and to think outside of the box. I worry that sometimes we can always look at a career as this one linear progression and this one stance. So I am going to graduate from uni and I am a pharmacist. And as a pharmacist, I need to, get a job as a pharmacist manager as soon as I can. And then I'm here, and where do I go next? And you might stay in that role for 20, 30 years. Maybe you want to be an owner, maybe you don't. Maybe you love that, and maybe you don't. But for the people that find that they're doing their jobs and, they used to get a lot of enjoyment out of it and they're not anymore, or maybe they always wondered what else they can do, then it's just realizing there's so many different avenues out there that you can do. And I find for me, there's so many more opportunities out there. Once you find one, there seems to be many more. Once you start looking for them, you start to see, it's like when you get your car, right? They say that if you buy yourself like a Subaru or something, then all of a sudden you start seeing Subarus everywhere. If you're looking for opportunities, you tend to find many more opportunities. And then sometimes you have to balance those. Sometimes you have to say no. Like, you cannot take everything, and that's okay as well. And not everything is your passion. But what I'd say is find out what you're good at. And by that, it's, people always say that as well. Like, find out what you're good at and how do you do that. But I always find asking people, like asking people what they think you're good at, as well as knowing what you can get done efficiently, isn't too taxing. And then finding out how you can use that in different ways. But I don't find that a career is a linear progression anymore. I don't feel like, although I have felt in my career, I think a lot of people have, like, once I've reached here, then I need to move here. And once I reach here, I need to move here. And if I don't in this period of time, then what does it look like? And does it seem like I've wasted all of this time? And does it seem like I'm not good enough? Or what does it look like? And actually, I would just say that maybe for me, what has worked is realizing that I do have my job and I do actually really enjoy what I do on a daily basis. I really enjoy having conversations with doctors. And every time I've had a chat about moving into another role, I've actually, instead of being excited about it, I'm actually a little bit like, actually, I really enjoy it. I'm worried that I would take a role because other people see it as a progression, that is something that I actually wouldn't enjoy on a day-to-day basis. And that I've actually been quite considered about. So I've actually got the opposite problem, right? I actually enjoy what I do. And you're thinking, do I have to progress? And sometimes you do. Sometimes you feel like you want to progress and you could really contribute to that role. But I've also looked at what I can add on and how I can use all of my different skills so I can move them all forward a little bit. I didn't know that with a podcast that I would, enjoy asking people questions, tailoring questions, really representing their stories and having people feel like it was a great experience and they love being a part of it. And that's a skill that I wouldn't have had a chance to find out if I hadn't have been part of the podcast. Writing articles. I do enjoy sharing opinion pieces. I also started somewhere, like talking to hubby and talking about a frustration. He's like, well, why don't you write it? Why don't you write it down? And I did. I wrote it down, and then you actually looked at it, and I realized it was a very long article. So you cut it, and you tinker with it, and I'm like, oh wow, it actually is an article to see if like the AJP or someone wants to publish. And I think that's how you kind of start, just trying to be really productive with your passions and starting somewhere. So writing, that was something that I didn't know that I would be good at or that I would enjoy either. But yeah, I find that now that I get really impassioned about something, I do a lot more writing about it because I can type pretty quickly. So there you go. You think it, you can write it, and then play about with it a couple of weeks later and have an actual finished product. But yeah, and it's nice that other people see that, because once you actually find out what your strengths are, other people see them too and capitalize on them as well, which is great. So I found that those same transferable skills can potentially go to the FIP with just representing people's voices, sharing people's stories, try to provide guidance on how to best proceed. They're all quite transferable, but I'm developing them all at the same time.
If we can narrow down, what's that most important thing you want our aspiring pharmacists to take away?
Okay, so I'm going to try really hard to keep it to one or two. I'll start there. I'll try to keep it to one or two. I would say that you're going to get lots and lots of advice in your career. And I would say some people will tell you that once you've studied one thing, you are locked into this box. You have to follow this pathway and you have to do this exact specific job, and this is your only goal. And that might be great for that person, and it might not be great for you. So what I would say is you need to be really, truly honest with yourself about your skills, about your passions, and about what you hope to achieve. Because the greatest thing you can do for the world is bring your best self and find out what really motivates you and bring that to the world. And if you're not doing that, and if you're just following other people's boxes, I mean, to me, there have been times when I guess sometimes you worry, I'm like, well, I've picked this job. Am I really being true to what I studied? Am I taking a step back? And you know what? I'm just being true to myself. And at the end of the day, you're paying your bills. You're not asking people for help. You're contributing to the world in the best way that you know how. I think those are pretty good justifications for what you do. So I would say be true to yourself. Take advice, which is always great, but realize it's not always applicable to you, and know that you have to do, I guess, what you find peace about, what helps you sleep at night. That's what you need to do. So that's my advice. And it's not linear. It's not a formula. It's not a guarantee that your job or your career will look any certain way. And just be open-minded, because it more than likely won't look how you thought it would look. So that's, I don't know, one piece. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. That's a starting point. What else would I say? We always talk about, we always talk about finding mentors, and I think that's great too. I would say that whatever you think that you want to move into, the same way that I tell people now who want to go to uni, I'm like, always spend time in that role. So don't just say that the pharmaceutical industry, like, this is what I want to work in, and this one's going to make me happy, and this one I can move up a ladder. It's about like spending time with people in that role. So people don't always have to directly mentor you, as in directly answer all of your questions and guide you through the process, but sometimes just watching what they do day to day. Because I always think that although a career doesn't have to follow a specific path, it's always nice to be informed each step of the way, so that you don't, take a job, think that's one for you, get kind of disappointed and a bit disheartened, and go back to something that is more comfortable and more in line with what you thought you should do, but still isn't your passion. Always still trying to look at your values, what's important to you, and making sure that you know that for any role that you want to move into, that you really have done your research about it, and that you know with a significant confidence in that's something that you want to move into. Each job has its pros and cons, but I always believe in making an informed choice, and that I would advise people to do, so they can just make the next best step with an informed choice.
Well, thank you so much. If we want to connect with you.
Well, yeah, there's lots of ways. So you can find the AJP podcast on Apple, on Spotify, or connect to it on the AJP website. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I share a lot of material on LinkedIn. You can also find me on Twitter. So under Carlene McMaugh, you can still find me on there, sharing some of my ideas as well. I'm happy to connect on lots of different ways. I won't always be able to give amazing advice, I'm sure, but hopefully you can find a way that motivates you, and the podcasts are just an amazing opportunity to hear lots of different perspectives from lots of different people about some great topics, and very up to date. So I would say AJP Podcast, Apple, Spotify, LinkedIn, Twitter.